When wife Kate came back to pay tribute to her late husband, she saw a shocking scene. Kate never thought that her husband had passed away for 10 years, and the dog Hachi was still waiting for his owner to return at the station entrance. Hachi sat there with a dazed and dirty look, and he had long lost his vigor and vitality. Even Kate had walked out of the haze and started a new life, but Hachi was still waiting foolishly. After 10 years, no one in love could guarantee loyalty, but Hachi was faithful to one person. The uncle selling coffee on the side couldn't help but hide his tears with his back turned. Perhaps only he knew what Hachi had experienced in the past 10 years. At this time, Hachi had also recognized Kate, but it avoided her eyes, fearing that it would miss every person leaving the station. Kate hoped to wait for the next bus with Hachi, and then she hugged Hachi tightly in her arms. Memories of their first meeting kept emerging in her mind. That night, the couple was enjoying the sweetness in bed, but the puppy suddenly licked her feet. This incident immediately made her furious, and her husband Parker hurriedly told her the origin of the puppy. Perhaps it was destined by fate. The puppy passing by the station suddenly stopped in front of Parker. Seeing that it was clean and tidy, Parker judged that it should not be a stray dog. So Parker held it at the station and waited for someone to find it, but until the last bus was sent off, the owner of the dog did not come. Parker had to take it to the station management office, hoping that the administrator would take it in for a while and wait for the owner of the dog to come and find it. But the administrator said that it could only be taken in for one night at most, and if no one claimed it, it would be sent to the animal shelter. Faced with the administrator's ruthlessness, Parker also worried about the situation of the puppy and finally decided to take the puppy home first. Parker murmured to himself along the way, and his love for the puppy was beyond words, but when he arrived at the door, he still tiptoed to avoid his wife. Parker settled the puppy in the study downstairs and repeatedly told the puppy not to run around. Unexpectedly, before he closed the door, his wife Kate came downstairs in sexy pajamas. Kate said excitedly that she had prepared a surprise for him, and Parker smiled bitterly and said that he also had a surprise. But before he could say it, Kate couldn't wait to pull him upstairs. However, the puppy who had just arrived in the study was not idle. When he was wandering around, he accidentally stepped on the piano. Kate heard something wrong downstairs, and Parker lied that it was probably a branch that scratched the window. However, just when the two were enjoying the sweetness, the puppy pushed open the door and found their room. In fact, Kate didn't dislike dogs, but the life of a dog was too short, and she didn't want to experience the sadness before. Parker knew her thoughts and concerns, so he immediately promised to find an owner for the puppy tomorrow, but let it stay in the cabin outside tonight. Kate could only agree for the time being. The cabin was where Parker used to keep a dog, and it had everything the dog needed. In order to make the puppy sleep more comfortably, Parker not only laid a mat and covered it with a blanket. He also found the puppy's toys. After everything was arranged, Parker turned off the light, but soon turned it back on because he was worried that the puppy would be afraid of the dark. But the puppy was not afraid of the dark, but was afraid of being abandoned, so when Parker closed the door and left, it looked at the figure going away through the gap and whimpered in disappointment. The next day, daughter Andy was overjoyed to see the puppy, so she tried her best to persuade her father to adopt it. But at this time, Kate had already printed out a missing owner notice and brought a photo of the puppy. No matter how much the father and daughter pleaded, it was useless. Parker had no choice but to put the puppy in a backpack and took it to the animal shelter. The staff said they could adopt the dog, but they could only take it in for 2 weeks at most. If no one adopted it after 2 weeks, it would be humanely disposed of. After hearing this, Parker felt that it would be more reliable to find an owner for it himself. Then he found a shop owner who liked small animals. When she saw the cute look of the puppy, she immediately liked it very much. However, her cat was full of hostility towards the dog, so Parker had no choice but to post a notice to find the owner everywhere. Moreover, Parker asked passers-by if they wanted to keep a dog, and even asked the uncle selling coffee at the train station. The uncle jokingly replied that he liked money more, and then listed the inconveniences of keeping a dog. Unwilling to give up, Parker came to the station again and asked the administrator if anyone was looking for the dog. The answer he got made him disappointed again. Despite this, he still insisted on asking the administrator to help post the notice to find the owner. Then, he ignored the administrator's reminder that it was forbidden to bring dogs on the train and quietly took the puppy in his bag on the train. Parker even split his breakfast in two and secretly fed it to the puppy while his neighbor was not paying attention. The puppy ate happily and made noises from time to time. In order not to attract other people's attention, Parker had to cover it up by barking. Then the puppy followed Parker to the classroom. It paced recklessly under the feet of the dancing students and lay down when it was tired. Parker asked the students one by one whether they wanted to keep a dog, but all ended in failure. Parker brought a piece of torn paper left on the dog cage to the home of his old Japanese friend Ken. The paper seemed to hide the secret of the puppy. It turned out that it was not an ordinary dog, but a Japanese Akita dog representing luck and loyalty. The collar on its neck had the number 8 written on it, which might be its name, Hachi. When Parker asked Ken if he was willing to keep a dog, Ken told him meaningfully that perhaps the puppy had already made its choice. Ken's words gave Parker a mysterious power deep in his heart. When he got home and chatted with his wife, Parker inadvertently called out Hachi's name. His wife immediately noticed that something was wrong with Parker because once the owner gave the puppy a name, he must have been ready to adopt it. Parker quickly said that he had no such plan, but when the two were arguing, Hachi, who was just beside him, suddenly disappeared. After searching for a while, they found that Hachi had bitten the model that Kate had made several months ago into a mess. Kate was completely furious and collapsed, and ordered Hachi not to let her enter the house again. That night, it saw Parker and his wife quarreling through the crack in the door, and Hachi seemed to realize his mistake. It lay quietly in the kennel without saying a word, and Parker, who felt the sudden change in the weather, still came to the doghouse. Simply carried Hachi into the house, and Parker, who had just quarreled with his wife, did not dare to go upstairs. He was bored and looked up information about Akita dogs on the internet. He found that this type of dog has existed for more than 4,000 years and is the first companion of humans. In order to avoid being discovered by his wife, Parker prepared to return to the bedroom after settling little Hachi. But little Hachi would not let him leave, so he had to stay and watch the game with little Hachi. The man and the dog also shared a bucket of popcorn together, which looked harmonious, warm, and happy. When Kate, who was awakened by the sound of the TV, found downstairs, Parker was already sleeping on the sofa, and little Hachi was still playing mischievously on him. Kate wanted to turn off the TV helplessly, but little Hachi licked her fingers in a flattering manner. But this behavior still failed to shake his wife's heart. At this time, Parker was also awakened by Kate's movement and then hurriedly hugged little Hachi and kept apologizing. Seeing her husband's cautious appearance, Kate had to agree that Hachi would continue to stay in the room for one night. The next day, Parker taught Hachi to play the ball-catching game. He thought Akita dogs were so smart. This game that other puppies could learn, Hachi must be able to learn it without a teacher. But Hachi didn't know why and didn't cooperate. Parker didn't get angry or impatient, but taught it carefully. Parker even lay on the ground to demonstrate. At this time, his wife received a call in the house. Someone saw the revelation and wanted to adopt Hachi. But just as she happily took out a pen and paper to record the contact information, she looked up and found her husband, who was even happier outside the house. She hadn't seen Parker's innocent look for a long time, and then Andy also joined in excitedly. It was as if Hachi was originally a member of the family, and such a family was originally happy. Kate was not a heartless person, and the sharp ice in her heart slowly began to melt. So she apologized to the person on the other end of the phone. The dog had been adopted, and then decisively hung up the phone. In this way, little Hachi officially became a member of the family. As time passed, the little dog turned into a beautiful boy with shiny hair. But as he grew older, Hachi became more and more clingy. Every time Parker left home to go to work, he would lie at the door and watch him go. One day, he finally couldn't stand the loneliness and dug a small hole in the backyard and climbed out. When Parker just got on the train, he saw Hachi on the platform. He couldn't believe his eyes, and he couldn't believe that Hachi could find the station by himself. After a moment of tenderness between the man and the dog, Parker asked him to go back quickly. But Hachi kept following him and didn't want to leave, so Parker had to take him home first. He also filled up the hole that Hachi dug when he escaped from prison, and before leaving, Parker warned him not to follow him again. Hachi knew he was in the wrong, so he gave up the idea of escaping. After spending a day in the yard board, he suddenly heard the whistle of the train entering the station and realized that Parker might be back. So Hachi quickly jumped out of the yard, then trotted all the way to the station, and then sat on the flower bed at the door waiting for Parker to appear. Sure enough, Parker came out of the door soon, and Hachi immediately rushed over enthusiastically. Parker thought it had been waiting here for a day, or Kate brought it here. But the uncle who was buying coffee next to him said that it ran here by itself 2 minutes ago. Parker felt Hachi's spirituality again, and the train manager who saw all this couldn't help but regret that he missed such a loyal partner. The next day, Parker still didn't want Hachi to follow him to work, but seeing the pitiful eyes, he finally softened his heart. So every day after that, Parker had a guard when he went out. Hachi stayed by his side like a loyal guard, but sometimes he would also play with him. When they arrived at the station, Parker gave orders for Hachi to go back, and Hachi walked back obediently. On the way back, he would also eat some delicious food sent by the owner of the delicatessen when passing by. In the afternoon, he would squat on the flower bed on time and could accurately find Parker in the flow of people coming and going. Then he would fly over and throw himself into Parker's arms. This moment was Hachi's happiest moment, and Parker also washed away the fatigue of a whole day's work through this enthusiasm. From then on, it became a habit for Hachi to pick up Parker, no matter it was cold or hot or windy, frost, rain, or snow. Hachi always arrived at the flower bed at the station on time before 5 o'clock to wait. Gradually, people around him also recognized it, and the figure of one person and one dog became a beautiful scenery. But that day, Parker did not see Hachi after get off work. Parker anxiously looked for and called everywhere, even came to Kate's workplace, but still did not find any trace of Hachi. It was not until he got home that he was surprised to find that Hachi was blocked at the door by a skunk and dared not go out. Parker immediately took out a cardboard box and carefully covered the skunk. But when Parker signaled Hachi to run, Hachi accidentally fell to the ground with the box. Finally, the frightened skunk sprayed Parker's face with stinky liquid. So when his wife came home from get off work, she saw a man and a dog in the bathtub taking a tomato bath. But even though they had been washed countless times, they still exuded a strong stench. So that night, his wife sent him to the living room to sleep with disdain. Since Hachi's company, Parker's family's life has not only become more fun, but also more surprises and happiness. On this day, Parker's Andy brought her boyfriend home. In order to liven up the atmosphere, her boyfriend came to the yard and wanted to play a ball-picking game with Hachi. But no matter how hard he tried, Hachi remained indifferent. Parker quickly explained that it never picked up the ball, but Parker didn't know the specific reason. After hearing this, the boyfriend could only pick it up himself in a sullen manner, but he tripped and made a big fool of himself. Hachi thought the boy was stupid and never thought that he would become Parker's son-in-law in the end. Later, Parker specifically asked Ken about Hachi's inability to pick up the ball. Ken explained to him that Akita dogs are different from other dogs. They never take the initiative to please humans. If they take the initiative, there must be some special reason. After listening to Ken's explanation, Parker didn't take it to heart. Until this day, he asked Hachi to accompany him to the station as usual. Hachi, who had never attacked Parker, barked at Parker and even circled in circles. Parker didn't know what it meant, so he just went up to hug and comforted it for a while. But when he was ready to go out again, Hachi, who always couldn't wait to go with him. This time, he didn't move abnormally. Seeing that he was about to miss the train to work, Parker walked out of the house without thinking. Seeing this, Hachi still didn't follow immediately, but turned back to the cabin and took out the tennis ball that he never disdained to play with. Then he opened the door and chased after him. When he saw Hachi chasing after him, Parker's originally lost face bloomed with a smile again. But facing Hachi, who was playing the ball-picking game in an unusual way, Parker not only didn't feel strange, but praised him repeatedly. He even showed off to the people around him, completely forgetting Ken's words before. Finally, Parker walked into the station, while Hachi stood there reluctantly watching the train go away. And this time, it did not go home as usual, but sat in the flower bed and waited until 5 p.m. But the familiar figure that should have appeared never walked out of the door. Until late at night, the uncle selling coffee also closed, and it still did not wait for the person it was waiting for. Later, Parker's son-in-law took it home. That night, Hachi was in his cabin, observing the scene in the opposite room through the gap. Although the lights were still bright, there was no laughter and joy in the past, but endless sadness and crying instead. It turned out that Parker did not forget to put the tennis ball next to the piano during the daytime class. He even took the initiative to share Hachi's story later. He suddenly felt unwell and planned to rest for a while. Unexpectedly, when he stood up again, he suddenly fell to the ground and never got up again since then. Hachi didn't know what a heart attack was, or even what death was. He only knew that his master had made an agreement with him to meet at the station after get off work. But when the family went to Parker's funeral to remember their lost love, Hachi arrived at the station before 5 o'clock as usual and then sat in a fixed position waiting for Parker to return. Late at night, the sky was filled with continuous snowflakes, but Hachi still squatted at the door motionlessly. When the station manager saw this, he told him reluctantly that he didn't have to wait any longer because he wouldn't come back. But when he saw Hachi's determined eyes, he instantly realized that no one could shake his loyalty. Later, his wife moved away from the sad place, and Hachi was taken to their new home by his daughter and son-in-law. Although the new home was beautiful and the cottage was comfortable, Hachi was depressed and listless every day, because the most intimate face was missing from his world. So when his son-in-law came back from shopping, Hachi rushed out of the house. No matter how his son-in-law shouted, he kept going forward and refused to stop. Then he crossed the snow-covered woods, stepped on the freezing cold railroad tracks, and ran all the way to home. When he was tired, he rested in the old car and continued on his way after waking up. Finally, after passing through the bustling city, he came to the familiar home, but it was no longer the same as before. The owner of the house was also replaced by an unfamiliar stranger, but he still refused to give up hope. Then he came to the train station and lay on the flower bed facing the exit. Even if someone tempted Hachi with delicious food, he would not be moved because he had to keep an eye on the door of the exit for fear of missing the most familiar person. However, soon his daughter and son-in-law drove over, and after some sincere persuasion, they took him home again. But Hachi refused to eat after returning home. Andy comforted him and said, "I am as sad as you are. I miss my father all the time." But before she could finish, the train whistle attracted Hachi's attention again. He came to the fence and looked eagerly. If the missing sounded, it would be deafening at this moment. Andy also understood Hachi's mind, so she held back her tears and said, "If you want to leave, I also respect your wishes." After that, she opened the door without hesitation, and Hachi licked her fingers carefully and ran to the entrance of the train station again. Waiting for the face that will never appear again, the uncle selling coffee was not surprised when he saw Hachi, because he felt that the flower bed full of snow might be the best destination for the loyal dog Hachi. Suddenly a white puppy came over, and Hachi wanted to play with it. But it was exactly 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and he couldn't leave, so he could only watch his playmate being called away by his owner. In the days that followed, Hachi still showed up and waited on time every day. When he was hungry, he went to a nearby store to ask for something to eat. When he was sure that no one was around at night, he returned to the abandoned truck to rest. In this way, Hachi waited and waited day after day. Gradually, his loyalty triggered widespread discussion and also attracted the attention of a reporter. So he began to interview people who were familiar with Hachi and learned about the deep bond between Hachi and Parker. Soon after, Hachi's deeds were reported by the media. His loyalty moved people from all walks of life. So they sent money and food to him, but the station manager in charge of the execution. He took all the money and property for himself and didn't use it for Hachi at all. Later, Ken also saw the report. Then he came all the way to visit Hachi. At this time, the uncle who sold coffee happened to come to give Hachi food. Ken proposed to subsidize some dog-raising expenses in case Hachi got sick and had no money for treatment. But the uncle declined his kindness because everyone in the neighborhood liked Hachi very much. They were also willing to pay to take care of this extraordinary stray dog. After the uncle left, Ken and Hachi reminisced about the past. "I miss Parker as much as you do, but he will never come back. But if you want to wait, then keep waiting." Because Ken knows that for Akita dogs, things that have been determined will not change. Perhaps Hachi will have the motivation to continue living if he stays here for the rest of his life. Before leaving, Ken also wished Hachi good health and safety. Since then, Hachi has continued to wait in the flower bed. From the vibrant early spring to the cold winter when everything withers. No matter how time passes and how the seasons change, Hachi has always stayed in the flower bed at the entrance of the station. That day, Kate came from another place to attend Parker's 10th anniversary of death and met Ken by chance at the cemetery. Ken lamented that the years were too long to count and the old friends were not as good as before, and he felt that another year had passed and another autumn had come. When the two came to the train station after the memorial, they saw a shocking scene. On the street, a stray dog with dirty hair and old body was walking towards the train station. And it was Hachi who had been guarding the station for 10 years, although he was already unable to move and was staggering. But it still climbed up the flower bed with difficulty and sat down facing the station gate. When his wife saw it, she ran over and hugged him and cried after confirming that it was Hachi. She never thought that a dog would wait for its owner for 10 years, regardless of wind and rain. When the coffee uncle next to him saw it, he couldn't help turning around and wiping his eyes. After an unknown period of time, snowflakes fell from the sky again. His wife and grandson were flipping through the photo album in the house, while telling the story of Parker and Hachi. On a cold night with wind and snow, Hachi seemed to hear the sound of the train coming into the station again. Then it stood up with difficulty and walked towards the station with staggering steps. The snow was falling on Christmas Eve, but the joy of the world had nothing to do with Hachi. All that was left was countless thoughts, endless desolation and sadness. Not long after, Hachi closed his eyes with difficulty. In a trance, Parker's favor flashed like a revolving lantern. We may meet many people in our lives, but in Hachi's short life, Parker was everything to him. In a trance, Hachi seemed to have returned to the night when he met Parker. Under the warm yellow light, it was the familiar smile of the owner, and Hachi finally jumped into the warm embrace of the owner again. Then Hachi closed his eyes as he wished. The 10-year wait has now turned into a stairway to heaven. At the end of the stairway, Hachi will meet his owner again. Later, Parker's grandson grew up and learned this touching story. He not only shared Hachi's story with his classmates, but also adopted a puppy and named it Hachi. Life seemed to have entered another reincarnation. The story of Hachi the Loyal Dog is directed by Lars Hallström. Richard Gere leads the lead. A drama film released in 2010. This film is adapted from a true story. The prototype Hachi was born in Japan in 1923. After the death of its owner, Izaburo Ueno, it has been waiting for its owner at Shibuya Station for nearly 10 years, until his death on March 8, 1935. During this period, in order to praise Hachi's loyalty, people cast a bronze statue of Hachi at Shibuya Station. Today, this place has become a famous tourist attraction and landmark in Japan. In Hachi's 12-year life, he only spent 2 short years with his owner. But it was these 2 years of companionship that made Hachi wait and guard for nearly 10 years after his owner's death. In 2 years, humans may have experienced several intimate relationships. In 10 years, humans may have long forgotten the original person. But for dogs, even if they get along for a short time, they will spend their whole lives to remember and commemorate. Well, today's movie sharing ends here. Welcome to like, comment, and forward. Thank you for your patience in watching. Looking forward to meeting you next time.